The next thing is brokenness, the process. Only when we allow God to break us is when God uses us to the fullest and become useful for Him. Again, the process, just like that one piece of wheat, when it's put into the ground and it's broken open, only then is when it's going to become fruitful. How do we become productive in our lives? Brokenness is God's method of dealing with our self-life. Living independently of God is another form of self-life. 2 Corinthians 4:16, therefore, we do not lose heart, though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are becoming renewed day by day. God deserves and demands every part of our life, so we are living expressions of Him. Two primary reasons for our purpose: spiritual maturity, willing to change what we can't hold onto our old ways, and the second part is willing to grow and submit to God. A little bit about Moses and his life. Moses was a great man. We all know what he did, but he had to break Moses first. Moses was a great man of wealth because he was brought and put in the house with the king, and at the same time, he was full of pride. He had family wealth, he had power, but God had to strip him of all of that because all of that stood in the way. So in order to do all that, to bring him back to his greatest power, where God shows up, where Moses felt weak. He talked about, he was sent, he hid because he killed the Egyptians. It's all the story, but he killed one of his own, the people that were persecuting his people. So when he left, and then he came back, he was scared. He's like, God, I don't want to go. They're going to kill me too. But it took years for him to be able to do that. So as he gave up his self, and he was able to submit to God, God protected him, said he would go with him. And God blessed him through that. But first he had to be broken. And that was very difficult for him to have to leave all of what he knew behind to do that. God's way is using the weakest. The world wants to use the most prestige people. But God always refers to many people in the Bible the opposite, which is kind of interesting, which makes me feel good. God's purpose is not to make you wealthy, of course. But if anything stands in the way, He will put a bullseye again on that, and He will remove it. Again, kind of back to the pot. If it's not in His likeness, He'll crush it. He'll throw it back on the wheel and cut off a little bit more each time to make you a little bit more like Him. If there's any flaws or independence in our life, He's going to prune that. And He talks about that also in other verses about pruning those things. He has to prune them back first for the fruit to come back and be more fruitful for Him. Question I want to ask is, what is God zeroing in on your life? What are those things that He wants to break? That He's tightening that vice, lovingly and slowly carving areas out of it to be, again, more like Him. How many of you want God's best for you? How many of you are willing to let God break you? Are you willing to say, God, I want to be loving and willing expressions of your love? Either I'm going to allow God, or I'm going to hold on in fear of losing whatever it is that He's asking me to give up, and missing God's great design for your life. All revivals come from brokenness first, which I thought was really interesting. It made me think of our church, kind of where we're at right now. I talked a little bit about that earlier, about the brokenness that's happened and the things that, so, just keep praying that God's going to revive that and we're going to be back in a stronger way again. Sometimes that happens in churches. We don't like it when God chisels away at us, but every slice He peels off, tear, disappointment, and despair, it's all worth it to become more of that design that He has for you. That one day that you stand before God and see all that you've missed, you're going to wish that you would have gave it up. Kind of like what she was talking about. Some of the promises in Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians chapters 11 and 12. In chapter 11, it talks about Paul's suffering. Chapter 12, God gives him a great revelation about himself and the church. Verse 12, 7. To keep him from exalting himself, he had a thorn in the flesh. And he said that my power is in my weakness. You know, Paul persecuted Christians. He was arrogant. He wanted to exalt himself. He had a strong personality, but God had to break him to use greatness and to produce much fruit. You know, Paul, throughout the Bible, is where we all can relate for all the things that he's gone through. He was blinded, he was beaten with rods, he was jailed for his ministry, but Paul was a chosen vessel for God. And he was chosen even in his mother's womb. There are two areas that God wants to break in our life. Living in our own strength. We cannot live as a Christian in our own strength to the bondage of sin. Romans 7:15, doing the very things that we hate about our flesh. We do those very same things. So we try not to do those, but sometimes we do. We do the very things that we don't want to do. And God's grace in that knows, and he just kind of keeps coming back again and keeps molding us, putting us back on that pot. 2 Corinthians 12, God gave him a tremendous revelation, but he had to break him first from that. As Paul was being arrogant and doing all the things that he was doing, then when he turned his life around and said, you know, Paul, why are you persecuting them? And so he gave him a new name, he gave him Saul, and turned his life around, and he became, again, fruitful in that brokenness. He had 3 seasons of fasting, asking God to take it from him. He lived with us to keep humble upon God. Verse 7, keeping him from exalting himself. And 3 times he asked God to remove that, and God said, my grace is sufficient for you. So sometimes we do have those thorns in our in our lives, and you know, God doesn't remove them, unfortunately. But you can turn that around and look at that and use that as a strength in your life, and asking God to use it to maybe help somebody else, or whatever that may be. Verse 9 again, I will boast in my weakness at the power of Christ that dwells within me. He was content with his persecutions. Can we be that way with what she shared with us today? James 1:2. Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Verse 4, perseverance must finish its work, so you may be mature and complete, not lacking in anything. In Romans 8:28, I know the things that I have for you, plans of prospering. Brokenness, again, is back to being very painful. It was painful for Paul. God's objective, if we don't live without him or to serve him effectively, then we don't have, if we live without him, then we can't live effectively, is what I meant to say. So pride and arrogance is stripped from our life. God only wants to break us in love. He chooses the pressure that molds us. One thing to just know is brokenness is not a punishment. Sometimes we feel like it's a punishment. What did I do wrong? We need to understand that it's not a punishment. It's just a way of God bringing those things more under what he has for us. It says he chastises Christians, but he doesn't break us. Punishment, again, is for the unbelievers who have rejected God. So we need to understand that. 2 Corinthians in 4 verses, chapter 4, 16, 17, 18, explanation of God doing that in our life, if you ever want to read that. It says, our outer man is decaying, our inner man is being renewed daily. God is forming our character. So as we have a different pot, you know, I had another pot that was different. So each design is different from someone else. What is it that God's creating in you for his design? God doesn't set limitations on the period of brokenness. Sometimes it's longer than others. He controls the time. He controls the intensity, the fire, the pain, and the hurt. What comes out is a beautiful pot, though, and a beautiful design once he's done. Rule 1 with God, though, that he doesn't ever do. God will not allow more than what we can handle, that our spirit will be broken. He doesn't want to destroy us. He just wants to destroy our self-will. God's purpose is to bring body, soul, and spirit unto submission under Christ, to use us for all the greatness for us, for what we become. again, you know, back to the pot, you know, what is it that God has for you? What is it that He's asking you to give up? What are those areas that He's targeting? What are those things that are tugging on your heart? That little bullseye that He's got on it. So, you know, I just ask if there's things that you are feeling moved by that He's wanting to get rid of. I know He certainly is with me. I'm wondering, and I'm asking God to, you know, tell me what it is for me in my life. And I feel like He's really revealed some things. I told a few ladies here, so we'll find out if that's, I'm asking you to give me a couple confirmations on that one. It's pretty big. You know, one of them is quitting my job. So just be in prayer for me over that, because if that's where He's asking me to do it, that was pretty big. So I came from a job that I didn't make very good money, to a job that I make very good money at. I have benefits and different things like that, and so for God to ask me to walk away from that is a huge, huge thing. But at the same time, as I know that the things that come with that are very difficult, and it's really hard to walk away, even though because of the financial part of that. So as I was going through this, I'm like, okay, God, what is it? And the first thing I was like, oh, not that! Let it be something else, you know. And it's just like, again, what is He targeting? What's that bullseye that He has on? So, anyways, I mean, that's more or less, you know, what I wanted to share with you tonight is being willing to ask God to, first of all, what is it, those areas in our life? You know, and knowing that in each one of those, there's a principle, there's a purpose, a process, but there's a great promise at the end. Thanks.
Wow.